Welcome back again to Out of Time Reviews, Episode 7, brought to you by The Gate. Once again, I'm Andrew Parker, senior writer for thegate.ca, bringing you a roundup of reviews for all the latest movies in theaters and on streaming. If it's your first time here, welcome. If it's your 7th time here, I'm impressed. We got 5 new movies that we're going to look at on the show this week, but on the channel I also have an interview that I did with Haley Z. Boston, creator of the Netflix series Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen, which dropped this week. It's a really great new horror series that's absolutely worth checking out if you're into that sort of thing. It just came out this past Thursday, and I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be talking about this one. So if you want to know more about the show and how it came together, I got you covered. Link to this can be found above and in the description below. But for this week on the show, we're going to look at the kinetic action and horror mashup They Will Kill You, the time-traveling action comedy Mike and Nick and Alice, A Magnificent Life, the latest film from award-winning French animator Sylvain Chomet, a soon-to-be father wrestles with his feelings about modern technology in the documentary The AI Doc, or How I Became an Apocaloptimist. And closing things out this week is a look at boundary-pushing French filmmaker Julia Ducournau's Alpha. No new show next week because of the holiday. Plenty of new writing is going to be up over at thegate.ca. Some new interviews on the channel this week, and Out of Time Reviews will be back in 2 weeks. As always, like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Drop a comment, as always. Press some buttons or something. Let's get on with this week's films.
The Virgil was built in 1923. Today, it's one of the most exclusive buildings in Manhattan.
Hi, I'm the new maid.
With such wealth comes the expectation of the highest quality of service.
It's a lot of locks.
This building is a temple to Satan. Each month we must pay with a human sacrifice. Tonight, you are the offering.
Zazie Beetz stars in They Will Kill You, a cartoonishly over-the-top revenge thriller that has an admirable amount of vibes and action, but noticeably lacks in a lot of other key areas. Beetz stars as Asia Reeves, a recently released convict who takes a job as a housekeeper at a posh and mysterious New York City apartment building for the rich and powerful known as the Virgil. She's taken in by the building's supervisor, played by Patricia Arquette, and given the lay of the land. It's a building that looks old, but has plenty of modern security measures designed to keep outsiders out and insiders in. But before Asia can even start her duty, she's attacked in her apartment by a group of residents wearing slickers and unsightly animal masks. She's been brought there as a sacrifice to the devil, but what these Satan-worshipping elites don't realize is that she isn't who she claims to be, and she's on an unstoppable mission to rescue her younger sister, played by Mahala, who's also working there as a maid. I feel like I have to preface this review of director and co-writer Kirill Sokolov's first English-language feature with a story about the unique circumstances under which I viewed the film. I don't want this to be one of those online recipes where someone tells an entire life story before getting on to how they actually make the dish, but it does impact what I thought about the film. As with a lot of films I review, I saw this at an advanced screening that was a mixture of press, influencers, and invited members of the public who probably won tickets from a website, radio station, or whatnot. And for the first 2/3 of the movie, things were going great. The crowd was into it, cheering along with all the mayhem, cringing in horror at some of the brutality, and laughing at the jokes and sight gags. Then, to absolutely no one's fault, there was some sort of power issue at the theater where the screening happened. Not just our film stopped suddenly, but every movie in the same multiplex ended just as abruptly. It wasn't a problem that was going to be resolved quickly or easily. When power was finally restored to the projectors, the film started back up, but it had skipped a huge chunk of the movie and went straight into the ending sequence. And there also wasn't any sound, and the lights in the theater wouldn't shut off. And because of security-related restrictions around how long the DCP for an advanced screening of a film could be unlocked to be played, there wasn't any way to rewind or restart the movie that night. The crowd left disappointed and the vibe had been killed, but probably not as much as the people in the other 15 auditoriums of the theater that night who had paid to be there for something else. So this leaves me in a difficult situation. Ethically speaking, you can't review a movie if you haven't seen the whole thing, but it was clear that I wasn't going to see it on the night I intended to get it done. Credit to the people at Warner Brothers, though, they were able to get me a ticket to one of the Thursday night public screenings in the area free of charge to catch the movie again and pick up what I missed. And that, like Asia's weapon of choice in the film, turns out to be a double-edged sword. Studios like to screen films like They Will Kill You under optimal conditions, meaning in front of a crowd that's there expressly to have a good time and they're excited for what they're seeing. And if nothing else, They Will Kill You plays well to a large receptive audience. Sokolov's style of action is made to garner big reactions, laughs, and gasps. It's apparent from the opening scene where a younger Asia and her sister are trying to escape from their abusive father that Sokolov is a huge fan of martial arts movies, Quentin Tarantino, Tony Scott, and the music of the RZA. It's not a movie that hides its influences, it just embraces them and goes for them with full force. When the action shifts to the Virgil, that's where nods to the likes of any number of John Wick clones and the early gory splatter films of Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson can be found. When people get hit or shot and They Will Kill You, they fly and bounce and careen all over the place like a cartoon. This isn't the kind of movie you go to see for its seriousness, but this kind of tongue-in-cheek action certainly has a sweet spot. During my first attempt at seeing the entirety of They Will Kill You, it was apparent that this wasn't a smart movie. It's really just 60-second bursts of exposition and lore that punctuate full-scale chaos and carnage. And when viewed with a great audience, that's fine. I knew on that first viewing that They Will Kill You was paper-thin even in its best moments, but there was also a chunk of the movie that I missed altogether, and I saw the big fight scene at the end without any sound, and while members of the audience were filing out en masse to leave before anyone was told there was no hope of getting the screening back on track, and that the rest of it would be cancelled. So cut to Thursday night when I saw the film with one of its first public audiences, a very sparsely attended screening with maybe 8 other people, only one of whom seemed to have any reaction to what was happening on screen. The quality of the fight choreography, the musical score, the performances, and the gore was still up to snuff, but without that vibe, the movie was dying for me on a second watch. It's obvious that Sokolov and co-writer Alex Litvak had some big ideas for They Will Kill You, but they either axed them to overly streamline the film, the budget wasn't there to fit the overall vision, or someone somewhere along the way told them the movie was too slow. Outside of questioning the logic of all of this, which is easy to overlook since this is such a fantastical piece of escapism, the biggest issue are all the dangling threads about the Virgil and its residents that leave the experience lacking. Arquette does a fine job as the ominous, campily performed superintendent, but the rest of the cast outside of her and Beats are stuck in thankless, faceless roles. Tom Felton and Heather Graham play members of the Virgil's immortal elite-level goon squad, and at the start it seems like the latter might have some backstory, but really they're just there to take repeated physical abuse from the hero. Patterson Joseph plays a character that's almost interesting, the resident handyman and husband of Arquette's character. He betrays the Virgil and Satan by agreeing to help Asia on her mission, but when finally asked why he's doing any of this, his reaction is as simple as, I don't want to do it anymore, and then he doesn't factor into the rest of the film hardly at all. Joseph's character also makes it known that the Virgil is comprised of 9 floors, each catering to a different vice, but the film ends up doing a 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100, and goes from the second floor to the dreaded top floor in the blink of an eye. This development happened in the section of the film I didn't see the first time around, so on that first viewing, I didn't know how much time had passed between when the film had stopped and when it mysteriously started up again. As it turns out, the audience missed only about 8 minutes of movie, and none of it was of much importance. Just as the journey for the heroes seems to be beginning, They Will Kill You launches straight into the climax. I was unable to finish the film the first time I saw it, but now having sat through it 1 2/3 times, I still feel like what I've seen is an unfinished movie, a project with a lot of panache and style, but boasting enormous gaps where even a glimmer of narrative depth would be appreciated. They Will Kill You gives the viewer a lot, but it also leaves a lot of potential on the table, almost like this is a show reel for the filmmaker more than the completed project. Outside of the action, the only other thing that positively tips the scales here is Beats. She's a bona fide star, she'd be getting more roles like this than she does. Few people look better in a traditional hero shot than Beats, and even fewer can ride the line between comedy and seriousness that this film needs to stay afloat. She commands the entire film and almost makes it work out of sheer force of will. But ultimately, after a lot of consideration spread across a couple of days, which is more time to think about something like this than anyone should, I have to give it a marginal 5 out of 10. Your enjoyment of this is going to be subjective and situational. It comes down to whether or not you can view this with a packed audience or your ability to overlook a lot of obvious flaws in favor of a classic slice and dice bit of nastiness. I can see people enjoying this, but I can't really see myself revisiting this one again in the future.
So a nightmare fuel assassin has Mike in his sights and you're trying to help him survive the night. Is that the macro here?
Mostly. but with one important wrinkle, and show's gonna be easier than tell.
Mysterious.
Just a heads up, you're gonna freak out a little and you're gonna have some questions.
Holy shit. So there's two Nicks.
Well, you have some questions. I would imagine you would have some questions. I had a lot of questions.
Well, I do have a question. Which Nick's from the future?
What? How did you know?
Are you from the past?
I'm from the future, 6 months from now.
From talking about one action thriller with an outlandish premise to another, Mike and Nick and Alice combined shootouts and beatdowns with time travel in a slightly more appealing but just as wobbly package. James Marsden stars as Mike, a gun for hire working for a local crime syndicate. His boss, played by Keith David, is welcoming home his adopted son, played by the frequently hilarious Jimmy Tatro, after getting released from prison. The big boss is looking to capture the snitch that put his boy behind bars and present him to his son as a present at the end of the night's parties and festivities. Mike doesn't know it yet, but he's about to be framed as the stool pigeon. But before any of that can happen, Mike has bigger issues to address. His immediate superior in all things criminal, Nick, played by Vince Vaughn, has one final job for Mike. Cryptically, Nick convinces Mike to kidnap himself, or at least his past self. This Nick is from the future and has come to save Mike's life and that of his girlfriend Alice, played by Isa Gonzalez, who just so happens to also be Nick's wife. It's best not to think too hard about the time travel dynamics at play in Mike and Nick and Alice, and writer-director Ben David Grabinski isn't sweating the details too much either. This story is mostly one of those comedic survive-the-night thrillers that just so happens to have time travel grafted onto it as a gimmick. It's an original wrinkle to a sort of story that's been done before and just as well as this. Like They Will Kill You, which I just talked about, Mike and Alice thrives on kinetic action and sometimes brutal methods of dispatching baddies. But outside of an annoying tendency to use a lot of John Woo-styled slow motion and action sequences that's more of an unwelcome distraction than an homage, this is a much tighter and more fleshed out movie than that was, probably because the plot revolves around someone traveling from the future to the past to tell themselves how much of a jerk they've been. There's more meat on the bones here, and Marsden, Gonzalez, and Vaughn have been given plenty to do outside of the bombast. When he's not trying to adopt a style that's not befitting of this kind of action movie, Grabinski delivers on the promise of the film's major set pieces, especially during the blood-drenched grand finale. He also delivers a funny script that allows room for the performers, especially talented improvisers like Vaughn, Tatro, and Marsden, a chance to keep the banter and zingers snappy. It's not always laugh-out-loud hilarious, but Mike and and Alice hits in all the ways it needs to. His use of an eclectic but borderline unhinged soundtrack of recognizable tunes from the likes of Billy Joel, to Dave Matthews Band, to Andrew WK, to Oasis, to Crystal Method, also helps to create an atmosphere where anything could seemingly happen at any moment. Vaughn and Marsden have great comedic and collegial chemistry, with neither really playing the straight man or the goofball in this equation. A mid-film revelation about the nature of Nick's return to the past also helps to sell the budding romance between Gonzalez and Marsden. Everyone looks like they're having a good time doing their thing, and that rubs off on the viewer. The cast makes all this lunacy look effortless, and when you give these kinds of talent just enough to work with and the filmmaker has all the skills in a script that can back things up, it's easy to make something this entertaining. Where They Will Kill You moderately misses the mark, this one moderately succeeds, earning a 6 out of 10 from me.
One has to know when to bow out.
Never! I will not let you give up writing.
What are you here for, Marcel?
I don't just want you rambling on about us, because everywhere you've been, I've been too.
Bumpkins! If writing doesn't work out, then I can teach again.
And be miserable with your blackboard for the rest of your life.
There's no getting famous at this rate.
A bigger disappointment this week is A Magnificent Life, an animated biopic about the life of acclaimed French writer and filmmaker Marcel Pagnol that shows plenty of admiration for its subject and the art they created, but no sensibility or soul. Adapted from Pagnol's memoirs by master French animator Sylvain Chomet, who previously did masterpieces like The Triplets of Belleville and The Illusionist, A Magnificent Life is every bit as stripped down and empty as most other mainstream biopics, and the animation isn't up to the director's previous high standards. This is one of those movies where a prominent figure looks back on their life in their later years, this time opening with Pagnol trying to whip up a version of his memoirs in a scant 3 hours for Elle magazine, and the script definitely feels like it was come up with in about 3 hours. He does this by conversing with the ghost of his younger self, and sometimes with the ghosts of other family members and friends. In rapid-fire succession, the film bounces from his rural upbringing, to his young dreams of being an engineer, to the harnessing of his writing talent, to becoming an award-winning playwright, to becoming a box-office dud, to becoming a film director, to becoming a dud again, to running in with the Germans, and eventually to becoming an afterthought. Everything happens so fast that it's impossible to get to know Pagnol, or anyone else in his life for that matter, and every major life event covered in A Magnificent Life feels like a box being ticked off a checklist. This is the sort of film people talk about when they remark that a biopic feels like reading someone's Wikipedia page, and not even the novelty or visual ingenuity that could come from telling it via animation is enough to salvage this project. Ideas are put out into the fabric of the film, like how Marcel was always secretly revolting against his hard-to-please father, or how he'd rather be tinkering with machines instead of writing, but nothing is ever followed through on. The ghostly aspect of the film is also strange, especially during a sequence where young Marcel haunts a high-ranking German soldier during World War II. The love Chomet shows for stage and screen comes through, but without added depth to make these events and passages meaningful, A Magnificent Life is just a movie where a bunch of stuff happens as if you're being read to from a list. But if that were the only problem with A Magnificent Life, we'd be having a different conversation. Instead, it's just one of many, and Chomet's vision as an animator takes a back seat to easily digestible conventions. It bums me out to give this one a 3 out of 10, but it is really not a good film.
Your fear of AI is the collapse of humanity.
Well, not the collapse, the abrupt extermination. There's a difference.
So I started making this movie because my wife is 6 months pregnant. Is now a terrible time to have a kid.
I mean, let's just be honest. I know people who work on AI risk who don't expect their children to make it to high school.
What the...
Oscar-winning documentary filmmaker Daniel Roher teams up with collaborator and fellow Torontonian Charlie Terrell to wrestle with his anxieties surrounding artificial intelligence in The AI Doc, or How I Became an Apocaloptimist, a nice overview of the fears and promise of the modern tech boom and a personal reflection on relatable anxieties. As Roher prepares for the arrival of his first child with his partner Caroline Lindy, a fellow filmmaker who made the underrated and oddball romantic horror film Your Monster, he frets over the kind of future the baby will be born into. As someone who deeply values his pen and paper, something that's nicely constructed via hand-drawn animations, Roher's anxiety about the rapid rise of AI starts impacting his relationship. So in a bid to learn more about where these fears are coming from and how much validity they have, Roher sits down to interview people on both sides of the AI debate, those who think we're seconds away from doomsday, and those who think the technology will make things easier for humankind in the long run. Admittedly, it's hard to look past the evidence towards the negative in the early going of the AI doc, especially since Roher's on-screen default emotion is one of worry and panic. AI learns manipulation from the humans that feed it because it's technology that's cultivated rather than programmed. The untested nature of AI in military applications is extremely worrisome, as is the ability of an automated workforce that's 10 times cheaper than people are and require no breaks. This obviously also includes discussion of the environmental collapse the tech is already contributing to. Watching Roher spiral deeper into depression before Lindy begs him to find a counterpoint is both profound and hard to watch. It's not a filmmaker putting on airs for the sake of a better movie, but of a father-to-be genuinely freaking out over the kinds of things I think a lot more parents in waiting should be freaking out about. But then around the halfway point, Roher gets into the rosier side of AI, and how things can still be turned around. Once properly harnessed, AI could actually be a boon to artists, allowing more people to follow their passions and make a living from them. It has the potential to help reverse the very problems it's creating once it's properly calibrated. Its greatest application could be in the medical field, where the potential of it saving lives under the right circumstances could prove invaluable. There's plenty of quote-unquote data-driven optimism to be found amid all the darkness, and it also helps that 3 of the 5 heads of the major AI companies in the world at the moment are willing to give Rower their time for an on-camera interview, sharing their own thoughts and fears about their work, sometimes with refreshing candor. It's also very telling which 2 major AI tech CEOs don't show up, and you could probably guess who they are without even watching the movie. While some have already and not wrongfully critiqued that the AI doc is so middle of the road that it isn't all that effective, I would argue that this is more of a personal endeavor and essay film than it is an educational one. Rower and Tyrell give the viewer enough information to make informed decisions about how to proceed with AI in their own lives, and then pointing out the various ways that people are using it already and being impacted on a daily basis without even realizing it. Rower's struggle to not give in to anxiety is what drives the ship here. All of the questions he asks of his interview subjects are fueled by his fear, and as such, he refreshingly almost never asks what reporters would call the right questions. It's not so much a work of scholarship, but rather a work of love for a kid he hasn't even met yet. And maybe that's for the best, as the film openly acknowledges that things have been developing so quickly in the field of AI that most of this material will be outdated by the time the movie has been completed and released. It might not make any viewers feel better or worse about AI, but Rower lets people know that they aren't alone in their fears and joys, and that peril and promise in this situation can't be separated. All we can do is live in the moment, advocate for what's best, and keep our loved ones at the forefront of everything that we do. My score for this is a 7 out of 10. Raw and to tame writer-director Julia Ducournau's latest effort isn't the kind of film most would be expecting from the boundary-pushing French auteur, but still on a psychological level, it's an exceptional continuation of the theme she likes to explore. There's far less horror in this one and a lot more familial drama, which has already thrown a lot of people off and given this kind of a mixed reception on the whole since it premiered at Cannes last year. But I think that viewers that can put aside their own preconceived notions of what they believe a Julia Ducournau film should be will be treated to an odd but moving look at the toll addiction, disease, and discrimination can have on a family. Alpha is a 13-year-old girl, played by Melissa Barros, living in early 1980s Le Havre with her single doctor mother, played by Golshifteh Farahani. She's falling into a troubled lifestyle of boys and drugs, one day coming home with a mysterious letter A tattooed on her arm. A mysterious HIV and AIDS-like virus is running rampant in the world, one that turns people into curious-looking, almost marble and porcelain statues, and Mom, who works closely with the infirm, is understandably fearful that her daughter could have contracted something through her new tattoo. Alpha becomes a picked-on pariah at school that everyone treats with caution, while Mom, on the other hand, worries that Alpha could be following a path similar to her drug-addicted brother Amin, played by Tahir Rahim. The metaphors being used by Ducournau and Alpha aren't particularly subtle, but then again, neither were the ones in Raw or Titane. It's not so much the metaphors that matter, but how they're being utilized to tell a story. While nowhere near as graphic or grotesque as her previous films, Alpha still showcases a furthering of Ducournau's talents as a storyteller and visually dynamic filmmaker. As an allegory about how the nature of some disease is birthed from mixtures of pain and means of escaping from said pain, Alpha is a powerful family drama, one made all the more interesting because it's coming from the perspective of a Muslim family. Some of the notes here are familiar, but their presentation and framing is unique and different. Although the film is named after a young girl, she's only one part of a larger story, one that's at its most interesting and dynamic when it's following the film's adult characters. Boros is quite good and expressive as Alpha, but her portions of the film are also the least original, often leaning into teen drama cliches. Whenever the focus is on Rahim, one marvels at his commitment to the role, twitchy, gaunt, and unpredictable. He's rapidly deteriorating as a human being, but like with many addicts, it's the character's moments of clarity that make him endearing and worthy of someone taking multiple chances on to help him get clean. But Alpha functions at its absolute best whenever Farahani is the focal point. As a doctor who can only watch as society turns its back on people like her brother and daughter, Farahani encapsulates a doctor, mother, and sister driven by love who sacrifices everything to care for those with the deepest need. Her refusal to give up on loved ones extends to the care of everyone that comes through the doors of her overcrowded hospital. It's a devoted character and equally devoted performance, one of the actress's absolute best turns and the absolute best in any Ducournou film to date. The only major and glaring problem with Alpha goes back to what I said about how the film claims via its title to be about a character that's only part of a larger story, and unfortunately it's the least interesting one in the family dynamic. Alpha's arc just kind of exists. It doesn't really have any beginning or end, and that's a little disappointing when everything else is so tightly constructed. Had the film placed a larger emphasis on the adults, Ducournau's work wouldn't run as much of a risk of being misunderstood. And while there are some jaw-dropping visuals to be found in Alpha, audiences should recalculate their experiences to something a bit more grounded to reality than Ducournau's previous efforts were. Alpha is a film that feels personal to its filmmaker, and it's that sense of love and respect that comes through even in the darkest moments. I'm going to give Alpha a 7 out of 10 and say that it's worth a watch. It's another intriguing step in the career of one of cinema's most interesting artists at the moment. But what did you think about this week's films? Leave a comment if you have any thoughts. Check out more of my work over at thegate.ca. Take a look at some of the past episodes and interviews that we have up on the channel. Come back in 2 weeks for another edition of Out of Time Reviews. Till then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other.